The federal government has outlined how it will compensate the families of people found to have been unlawfully killed or abused by Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan. Now, compensation was one of the recommendations from the 2020 Brereton report.
That report found credible information that Australian Defence Force personnel were involved in serious crimes, including the deaths of 39 prisoners and civilians between 2005 and 2016. Joining us now is Dr. Nematullah Bizhan from ANU's Development Policy Centre. He is also a former Afghan government economic advisor. Thank you so much for joining us, Nematullah. What do you make of this plan by the federal government to compensate the families?
Thank you for having me in the program. I think it's a significant step forward to address the grievances of Afghans and acknowledge their sufferings, especially who bear the negative implications of foreign forces military operations in Afghanistan.
Give us a sense of what you're talking about and how the presence of the foreign troops impacted these villages in Afghanistan.
So the situation in Afghanistan was quite difficult and challenging. On the one hand, the presence of foreign troops in Afghanistan helped with improved security and development in some areas, but also and some others, many people suffered because of displacement, injuries, deaths, and property damage due to military operations. And especially it goes to the nature of conflict back in Afghanistan, because the insurgents were using population centers, and any retaliation against them would cause damage to civilians or civilian deaths.
You served in government roles during the time period that we're talking about. What were the government discussions at the time around the presence of foreign troops there?
So the role of the government when I was in Afghanistan was quite challenging. On the one hand, it was cooperating with the international security forces in Afghanistan, and on the other hand, was in trying to address the resentment of the populations, especially coming to issues such as civilian casualties and also damages caused due to foreign military operations in Afghanistan. This was a recurrent and intense issue, especially considering the relationship between the government and the international community in Afghanistan. That also affected negatively the relationship by the government on that time and the US administration, because it was an ongoing issue, but also some of the measures were put in place how to minimize the damage to civilians in Afghanistan. But given the nature of conflict and insurgency in Afghanistan, it was quite a difficult situation.
Afghanistan is now under Taliban rule. What do you see as the potential challenges in getting that money to these families and communities?
So I see two major challenges in implementing this scheme. The first one is the de facto administration of the Taliban is not internationally recognized. The Australian government does not have direct relationship with the Taliban. So reaching the beneficiaries is a challenge. That's why it requires a neutral actor to mediate, such as ICRC, who has the expertise and presence in Afghanistan. And the second issue or challenge I see with this scheme is that some of the groups, while the Taliban de facto authority agree with this process to implement it, but some other groups, also Talibans or the Taliban comprise of different groups, may target the families receiving the payment, especially because this is coming through defense, and it may expose those families. That's why when it comes to the implementation of this scheme, certain cautious measures to be implemented not to expose the families who were affected.
Just finally, is this move, you speak of the suffering by these families and these communities, is this move to provide this compensation enough to ease that suffering, the anger, the hurt?
It can provide some relief, definitely, and also acknowledging their suffering, but it's unlikely to fully appease those families who were negatively impacted by Australian military operations in Afghanistan, which requires access to justice and also, to some extent in the long run, addressing the main causes of conflict. So that means it requires a comprehensive effort.